Human history is often celebrated through achievements, empires built, technologies invented, cultures flourishing. Yet running beneath these triumphs are darker streams that have shaped our world just as powerfully. Massacres. Unlike battlefields where armies clash, massacres are calculated or chaotic slaughter of the defenseless. They stand apart because they defy the normal rules of war, targeting civilians, prisoners, and innocents in acts so brutal they echo for centuries. These rivers of blood force us to confront humanity's most unsettling truth, that cruelty is not an exception but a recurring force. Some massacres are well documented through court records, eyewitness accounts, and archaeology. Others linger in the realm of whispers, preserved by folk memory, rumor, and fragments of evidence. In both cases, they become mysteries. For no matter how many numbers we tally or orders we uncover, the why remains elusive. Why do humans, even ordinary ones, commit such acts? Were they following commands, acting in frenzy, or surrendering to ideology? And why are some massacres remembered fiercely, while others are buried or denied? Rulers have often tried to erase them, fearing shame or rebellion. Victims, in turn, have fought to preserve memory, turning tragedy into testimony. In this struggle, massacres become not just events but contested narratives. To study them is to study how societies remember, distort, or silence their own past. Each massacre offers a mirror of human nature, revealing ambition, fear, vengeance, and betrayal at their most extreme. What makes massacres enduring mysteries is not simply their horror, but their resistance to closure. Numbers remain debated, motives questioned, responsibilities blurred. They linger as wounds in collective memory, shaping identities and politics for generations. They also serve as warnings, reminders that peace and civility can crumble swiftly, replaced by rivers of blood flowing through towns, valleys, and cities. This series journeys across time and continents, from Europe's religious wars to colonial violence, from racial massacres to modern genocides. We will uncover not only the facts, but also the haunting silences that surround them. Each case will raise questions. Was it deliberate or accidental? Was it erased or commemorated? Could it have been prevented? By revisiting these tragedies, we do not merely recount sorrow. We confront the disturbing possibility that history repeats because we fail to learn. To understand massacres is to face both history and ourselves. They remind us that civilization is fragile, that morality can collapse when fear and power converge, and that truth itself can be as contested as the lives lost. The rivers of blood flowing through human history remain mysteries not because evidence is lacking, but because the human heart still resists understanding how such horrors could ever be unleashed. The 30 Years' War devastated 17th century Europe, leaving towns burned, populations scattered, and landscapes scarred. Yet among its countless atrocities, none is remembered with such horror as the sack of Magdeburg in May 1631. This German Protestant city, with nearly 30,000 inhabitants, became a symbol of suffering when imperial Catholic forces under Count Johann Tilly stormed its defenses. What followed was not a disciplined victory, but a massacre that shocked even the hardened veterans of the era. For weeks, Magdeburg endured siege. Supplies dwindled. Defenders fought desperately, and hope of relief faded. When the imperial army finally breached the walls, chaos erupted. Soldiers poured through the city, looting homes, torching buildings, and slaughtering indiscriminately. Churches, which should have been sanctuaries, were defiled. Priests and children alike were cut down. By the next day, fire consumed most of Magdeburg, reducing it to smoldering ruins. Out of 30,000 residents, fewer than 5,000 survived. Some estimates suggest 20,000 deaths in a single day, one of the bloodiest urban massacres of the early modern period. The enduring mystery of Magdeburg lies in intent. Did Count Tilly order the slaughter to terrify other Protestant towns into submission, or did discipline simply collapse after months of siege, unleashing soldiers' rage? Surviving correspondence paints Tilly as regretful, claiming he had not intended such devastation. Yet some argue his officers either encouraged the bloodshed or failed to stop it. In the fog of war, responsibility became blurred. The massacre quickly gained symbolic power. Protestant pamphlets labeled it Magdeburg's wedding, a bitterly ironic phrase suggesting the city had been forcibly united with death. Engravings and reports spread across Europe, fueling religious hatred and prolonging the war. To Protestants, it was proof of Catholic cruelty. To Catholics, an unfortunate but exaggerated tragedy. The truth lay somewhere between propaganda and reality, but the ruins of Magdeburg bore witness more powerfully than words. Today, historians debate numbers, motives, and meaning, but all agree that Magdeburg became a watershed in the 30 Years' War. It revealed how siege warfare blurred into massacre, how ideology justified cruelty, and how memory transformed tragedy into political weapon. The silence of those 20,000 dead still hangs over the city's name, making Magdeburg not just a battle, but a symbol of the human capacity for destruction. The Scottish Highlands are landscapes of loyalty and betrayal, where clan ties bound people together and feuds tore them apart. Among these stories, none is darker than the Glencoe massacre of 1692. On a freezing February morning, the MacDonald clan of Glencoe discovered that those they had welcomed into their homes as guests were in fact executioners. The political backdrop was the recent Jacobite uprisings. King William III, having seized the throne from James II, demanded loyalty oaths from the Highland clans. The MacDonalds of Glencoe delayed, swearing allegiance only after the deadline had technically passed. Through bureaucratic mishandling, their oath was not properly recorded. Officials branded them rebels, and punitive measures were set in motion. In early February, government troops led by Captain Robert Campbell of Glenlyon arrived in Glencoe. For nearly 2 weeks, they were received with Highland hospitality, eating and drinking with the very people they had orders against. Then, on February 13th, under cover of darkness, the soldiers turned on their unsuspecting hosts. Houses were set ablaze, families butchered in their beds, and survivors driven into the snowy mountains where many perished of exposure. Around 40 MacDonalds were killed outright, with additional deaths from cold and starvation. The betrayal shocked Scotland. Highland culture valued hospitality as sacred. To break bread with someone was to guarantee their safety. That soldiers could exploit this trust to carry out murder seemed monstrous. Yet who bore responsibility? Captain Campbell followed orders. But from whom did those orders originate? Some historians argue that John Dalrymple, the Earl of Stair, orchestrated the massacre with the king's approval, intending to make an example of a troublesome clan. Others insist William himself did not intend such treachery, and that overzealous ministers twisted his commands. The ambiguity has fueled centuries of debate. Documents use careful wording, leaving historians unsure whether the king knowingly sanctioned betrayal or merely authorized punishment without realizing how it would be carried out. For the MacDonalds and their descendants, the distinction hardly mattered. Glencoe became a symbol of broken trust, remembered in songs, poems, and folklore as one of Scotland's darkest nights. The massacre's legacy lies not in numbers, but in meaning. Compared to larger atrocities, its death toll was modest, but the method, murder under the guise of friendship, seared itself into memory. To this day, Glencoe's quiet valley carries an air of sorrow, as though the betrayal still lingers in its midst. The enduring mystery remains. Was it cold-blooded treachery ordered from the highest levels, or the malicious zeal of officials exploiting royal authority? In either case, the massacre shows that history's rivers of blood are not always vast floods. Sometimes, they are poisoned springs that taint generations. In the spring of 1876, the village of Batak in Bulgaria became the site of one of the 19th century's most chilling massacres. The Ottoman Empire had long ruled the region, and as nationalist sentiment grew, uprisings spread. The April Uprising was one such rebellion, meant to ignite a broader movement for independence. Batak, a prosperous Christian village, joined in support. What followed would shock Europe and leave behind questions that remain unresolved to this day. When Ottoman troops and irregular auxiliaries, known as Bashi Bazouks, reached Batak, they met little resistance. The villagers, poorly armed and outnumbered, could not withstand professional and irregular forces sent against them. The violence that ensued was not the clash of armies, but the systematic killing of civilians. Men, women, and children were cut down indiscriminately. Survivors later described how villagers sought refuge in the local church, only for it to be set alight, turning the sanctuary into a tomb. The blood of thousands, it was said, soaked the very stones of Batak. The numbers remain a matter of fierce dispute. Bulgarian accounts claim over 5,000 were killed. European journalists and diplomats, who arrived afterward, reported bodies in the streets and a stench of death that lingered for weeks. Their testimonies fueled outrage across Europe, turning Batak into a symbol of Ottoman barbarity and rallying support for Bulgarian independence. Yet Ottoman officials and later some historians disputed the figures, suggesting exaggeration for propaganda purposes. They acknowledged killings but argued the scale was far smaller, perhaps hundreds rather than thousands. This uncertainty forms the core of Batak's enduring mystery. Was a massacre an uncontrolled outburst of vengeance by irregular troops, or a deliberate policy designed to crush rebellion through terror? Ottoman authorities insisted the violence was not centrally ordered, pointing to the Başıbozuk's notorious indiscipline. But critics countered that official forces were present and allowed the bloodshed to continue. The line between sanctioned punishment and tolerated atrocity remains blurred. Archaeological findings, including mass graves, support accounts of large-scale killings. Yet even physical evidence cannot fully resolve debates over numbers or intent. What is certain is that Batak became a turning point in European perceptions of the Ottoman Empire. Newspapers and politicians invoked it as proof of a dying empire unfit to govern Christian populations. The event became not only a tragedy but a weapon in international diplomacy. Today, Batak is memorialized in Bulgaria as sacred ground, a symbol of national suffering and resilience. The church where villagers perished has been preserved, its walls still said to bear the marks of fire and blood. Yet historians continue to grapple with complexities. Propaganda, political agendas, and selective memory cloud the record. The Batak massacre reminds us that rivers of blood often flow not only from violence itself, but from the ways nations choose to tell or deny the story. Its mystery endures because it lies at the crossroads of atrocity and narrative, tragedy and politics. On April 13, 1919, the city of Amritsar in British-ruled India witnessed a massacre that forever altered the course of colonial history. In the enclosed garden of Jallianwala Bagh, thousands gathered to protest the arrest of nationalist leaders and to voice opposition to repressive laws. Families came with children, believing it a peaceful demonstration. They could not have imagined that the ground beneath them would soon run with blood. General Reginald Dyer, a British officer, arrived with troops and found the crowd assembled. Without issuing a warning to disperse, he ordered his men to block the exits and open fire. For 10 minutes, rifles spat bullets into the helpless mass. Men tried to shield women, children screamed, and panic surged as people sought escape. But the garden's narrow exits were sealed. Those who tried to climb walls were shot down. When ammunition was finally exhausted, hundreds lay dead and thousands more were wounded. The official British report admitted to 379 deaths. Indian sources, however, estimated over 1,000. Survivors' testimonies spoke of bodies piled atop each other, of a well filled with those who leapt in to escape gunfire. The disparity in numbers highlights the massacre's enduring mystery. Not what happened, but the true scale of its horror. Dyer later defended his actions, claiming he intended to create a moral effect that would teach Indians never again to defy British rule. His cold admission shocked even members of Parliament, yet many imperial loyalists praise him as a savior of order. He faced a commission of inquiry, but no real punishment. Instead, he retired honorably, reflecting the empire's unwillingness to hold him accountable. The massacre became a lightning bolt in India's independence movement. Mahatma Gandhi, who had once hoped for reconciliation with the empire, now called for full self-rule. Leaders across India cited Amritsar as proof that British rule rested not on law but on violence. Internationally, the massacre damaged Britain's moral standing, exposing brutality hidden behind its claims of civilization. The mystery of Amritsar is not in its denial but in its meaning. Was Dyer a rogue commander driven by fanaticism, or was it a logical outcome of an imperial system that viewed colonized subjects as expendable? His testimony suggests personal zealotry, but the muted reaction of the British establishment reveals a deeper complicity. The massacre was not simply one man's crime. It was a symptom of an empire sustained by force. Today, Jallianwala Bagh is preserved as a memorial. Bullet holes in its walls remind visitors of the moment when peaceful protest was met with merciless violence. For India, it remains both wound and rallying cry. The Amritsar massacre endures as an unsolved moral riddle, whether it was the cruelty of one officer or the inevitable cruelty of empire. Both way, rivers of blood flowed, and history itself changed course. In the early 20th century, Tulsa, Oklahoma, housed one of the most prosperous African-American communities in the United States. The Greenwood District, often called Black Wall Street, thrived with businesses, theaters, and cultural life. Yet in May 1921, prosperity turned to devastation when racial tensions exploded into one of America's deadliest and most suppressed massacres. The spark came from an accusation. A young black man, Dick Rowland, was accused of assaulting a white woman, though evidence was scant. Rumors spread quickly, inflaming a city already divided by segregation and resentment. White mobs gathered at the courthouse, demanding Rowland's lynching. When armed black residents arrived to protect him, shots were exchanged, igniting violence on an uncontrollable scale. For 2 days, white mobs poured into Greenwood. They set businesses ablaze, looted homes, and gunned down residents. Planes were even used to drop incendiaries, marking one of the first instances of aerial bombardment on American soil. Witnesses described streets littered with bodies and the district reduced to ash. Official records long claimed about 36 deaths. Yet survivors insisted the toll reached into hundreds, with mass graves rumored across the city. The massacre's enduring mystery lies not only in its scale, but in its erasure. For decades, the Tulsa Massacre was omitted from history books, absent from classrooms, and silenced in public memory. Survivors were intimidated into silence, insurance claims were denied, and city officials downplayed the devastation. Greenwood's ruins were quietly rebuilt, but the story of its destruction vanished from mainstream accounts. Only in the late 20th century did historians and descendants revive the narrative, pressing for acknowledgement and justice. Recent excavations have uncovered mass burial sites, confirming what survivors long testified. Yet the full number of victims may never be known. Was it dozens, hundreds, or more? The deliberate suppression of records ensures uncertainty. Tulsa's mystery is thus not whether the massacre occurred, but how society managed to bury it so thoroughly for so long. The massacre highlights how memory can be shaped not only by remembrance but by silence. Unlike other atrocities preserved through monuments and textbooks, Tulsa was erased, as if denial could wash away the rivers of blood spilled in its streets. This erasure deepened the wound, compounding tragedy with forgetting. Today, Tulsa has begun confronting its past. Memorials stand in Greenwood, mass graves are being studied, and the story is taught with growing prominence. Yet the questions remain: how many truly died? Why did authorities look away? And can justice be achieved when truth itself was buried for generations? The Tulsa Race Massacre demonstrates that history's mysteries are not always about what happened, but about what societies choose to remember. It is a haunting example of how silence can be as destructive as violence, leaving rivers of blood not only in the earth but in the conscience of a nation. The Trail of Tears represents not just one massacre, but an enduring tragedy that combined displacement, systemic violence, and widespread death. Beginning in the 1830s, the United States government, under President Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act, forced the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole nations off their ancestral lands in the southeastern United States. Their homelands, fertile soil, forests, and rivers, were coveted by white settlers and prospectors. Despite legal victories, including a U.S. Supreme Court ruling recognizing Cherokee sovereignty, the federal government disregarded justice and pressed forward with removal. Families were rounded up, often at gunpoint, herded into temporary camps, and pushed westward on a march of hundreds of miles. Conditions on the trail were catastrophic. Poorly supplied, lacking food, clothing, and shelter, thousands succumbed to exposure, starvation, and disease. Cholera and dysentery ripped through camps. Mothers lost infants along the roadsides. Oral histories describe soldiers indifferent to suffering, sometimes beating or robbing their captives. The Cherokee alone lost an estimated 4,000 of their 16,000 people, nearly a quarter of their population. Rivers along the route became grim markers, swelling with bodies washed downstream. Yet, Despite the unimaginable loss, survivors rebuilt lives in Indian Territory, today's Oklahoma. They carry with them culture, language, and stories that preserve their identity against erasure. The Trail of Tears remains a massacre of dignity and survival, a reminder that conquest often leaves rivers flowing not just with blood, but with grief and resilience. In December 1937, Japanese troops stormed the Chinese city of Nanking, then the capital of the Republic of China. What followed was 6 weeks of horror so devastating that survivors named it the Rape of Nanking. Over 300,000 civilians and prisoners of war were slaughtered in cold blood, their bodies dumped in mass graves or into the Yangtze River, staining its currents red. Entire families were executed. Men were bound and shot in groups, sometimes set ablaze while still alive. Women, young girls and elderly grandmothers alike, were raped in staggering numbers, estimates ranging between 20,000 and 80,000 victims. Children were not spared. Pregnant women were violated and then butchered. Soldiers turned cruelty into contests that could kill faster with bayonets, which could decapitate the most prisoners in one night. The massacre, documented by horrified Westerners who stayed in the city, revealed the darkest side of war, the stripping away of humanity. John Rabe, a German businessman and Nazi Party member, ironically became protector, establishing a safety zone that saved thousands. His diaries, alongside those of missionary Minnie Vautrin, provided undeniable testimony. For decades, Japan's acknowledgement of the atrocity remained fraught, fueling historical tension. Yet the massacre's legacy is undeniable. An Asian Holocaust whose rivers of blood symbolize unchecked militarism and the destruction of civilian life. Nanking remains a warning that once brutality is unleashed, civilization itself hangs in the balance. During the Vietnam War, U.S. soldiers carried out a massacre that shocked the world and reshaped conversations about morality in war. On March 16, 1968, American troops entered the hamlet of My Lai, expecting to find Viet Cong fighters. Instead, they encountered unarmed civilians, women, children, and elderly villagers. What followed was a slaughter. Soldiers gunned down between 347 and 504 people. Villagers were herded into ditches and executed. Women were raped before being shot. Infants were tossed into the air and killed. Entire families were annihilated in minutes. The horror may have remained hidden, but investigative journalist Seymour Hersh exposed the story in 1969. Graphic photographs by Army photographer Ronald Hebro further sear the massacre into global memory. My Lai was not just about soldiers losing discipline. It revealed how dehumanization, propaganda, and desperation in war could corrode moral boundaries. The official U.S. response deepened outrage. Only one officer, Lieutenant William Calley, was convicted, serving just 3.5 years under house arrest. Survivors of My Lai carry their grief in silence for decades, scarred by memories of rivers running with blood and rice paddies filled with bodies. My Lai forced Americans in the world to confront the brutality hidden behind patriotic narratives, a reminder that even powerful nations are capable of atrocities when empathy is drowned in ideology. From the Crusader massacres in Jerusalem to the rivers of Nanking, history is stained with atrocities that challenge our belief in progress. Each massacre, though separated by time, geography, and culture, shares common themes: dehumanization, silence, and denial. Often, perpetrators justified violence as necessity, as divine mission, or as patriotic duty. Yet survivors' testimonies reveal something deeper: trauma that echoes for generations, reshaping cultures and identities long after the killing stops. Rivers of blood may dry, but the memory flows endlessly through descendants, storytellers, and nations struggling to reconcile with past sins. The enduring mystery lies not in why massacres happen. Greed, fear, revenge, and ideology are familiar motives, but in why humanity repeats them despite knowing their cost. Is violence woven into civilization's fabric, or is forgetting too convenient, allowing old patterns to resurface under new banners? Remembering massacres matters because denial ensures repetition. Monuments, archives, and oral histories serve not only to mourn but to warn. They teach us that every society, no matter how advanced, holds within it the seeds of destruction. To forget is to risk watering those seeds. The story of Rivers of Blood is also a story of rivers of resilience. Survivors teach us that humanity can endure, rebuild, and resist erasure. But survival carries responsibility. To speak, to remember, and to refuse to let silence drown truth. In that choice lays the only hope of breaking history's cycle of massacre and memory. History's darkest chapters are warnings of the future. Don't let silence bury the truth. Subscribe to the Crit Stories for more untold mysteries of the past. And share this story so these rivers of blood are never forgotten.